Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're standing in the Austrian Alps in May 1945, where the impossible is about to happen. American GIs and Nazi Wehrmacht soldiers are checking their weapons, side by side, preparing to fight together against the SS. The spring air is thick with cigarette smoke and tension as these sworn enemies exchange awkward nods, knowing that in a few hours they'll either be dead or have participated in one of the strangest battles in military history. You can smell the gun oil mixing with alpine wildflowers, hear the nervous jokes in two languages, and feel the weight of history shifting beneath your boots. Let's be honest, if you were there, you'd probably be too confused to know who to shoot at, which is exactly how some of these soldiers felt. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment, letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel while you're drifting off. All right, let's begin the story. You're standing on a mountain road in the Austrian Tyrol, early May 1945. The war in Europe has days, maybe hours left. Hitler is already dead in his bunker, though you don't know that yet. What you do know is that something unprecedented is happening at a medieval castle perched on the cliff above you. American soldiers from the 23rd Tank Battalion are shaking hands with Wehrmacht troops, and not because anyone's surrendering. They're about to defend an ancient fortress together against a last-ditch SS attack. And the whole thing is so bizarre that when historians first uncovered this story decades later, many refused to believe it happened. The castle is called Schloss Itter, Castle Itter to you, and it looks exactly like something from a fairy tale. If fairy tales included machine gun nests and barbed wire, 13th century towers pierce the sky, their red-tiled roofs glowing in the morning sun. You'd think it was beautiful if you didn't know it had been converted into one of the strangest prisons in the Nazi Empire. This wasn't your typical concentration camp. No, this was where the Germans kept their honor prisoners. The French VIPs too valuable to kill, but too dangerous to leave free. Inside those stone walls, former French prime ministers paced nervously alongside generals and resistance leaders. These aren't random prisoners. These are the men who once ruled France, who signed treaties and commanded armies. Now they're waiting to see if they'll be executed before the Americans arrive, or if something even stranger might happen, like being defended by the very Wehrmacht soldiers who've been guarding them. The date is May the 4th, 1945. In your pocket, you might have a letter from home you haven't read yet. Maybe a photo of a sweetheart or a lucky coin. You're tired, bone deep, soul-crushing tired from years of fighting across Europe. Your unit has been pushing through Bavaria, and the rumor mill says the war could end any day now. Some optimists are even taking bets on the exact hour Germany will surrender. But right now, surrender feels very far away because you've just received the most insane orders of your military career. We're going to do what? You ask your sergeant for the third time, certain you've misheard. We're going to defend a castle, he repeats, patience wearing thin, with German troops against other German troops. You look around at your squad mates, searching for signs that this is some elaborate joke, but everyone's faces are deadly serious. Someone mutters what you're all thinking. Has the whole world gone crazy? The answer, you're about to discover, is yes. But it's a very specific kind of crazy. The kind that only happens when wars are ending and the normal rules start to dissolve. You're about to become part of the Battle of Castle Itter, the only documented time in World War II when American and German soldiers fought as allies. Historians still argue whether this was a case of exceptional circumstances creating unlikely partnerships, or evidence that even in humanity's darkest conflicts, there's room for enemies to recognize a common cause. Your American unit is small, just a few tanks and a handful of infantry. You've been fighting the Germans for so long that shooting at them has become second nature, like breathing or complaining about army food. The idea of fighting alongside them feels like someone asking you to suddenly write with your opposite hand. Everything about it is wrong, awkward, uncomfortable. Yet here you are, checking your M1 Garand rifle and wondering if the German soldier next to you, who's checking his Mauser, is thinking the same thing. You need to understand Major Josef Gangl to comprehend how any of this madness began. Picture a Wehrmacht officer in his mid-40s, grey at the temples, with the kind of tired eyes that have seen too much. He's not some fanatical Nazi. Historians still debate whether he ever truly believed in the cause or was just another professional soldier caught in history's meat grinder. What you do know is that by May 1945, Gangl commands what's left of a unit in the nearby town of Virgil, and he's got a problem that would make lesser men simply desert and run for the hills. You watch him pace his makeshift headquarters, a requisitioned gasthouse that still smells of beer and sauerkraut. Maps cover every surface, marked with positions of SS units that everyone knows are the real danger now. See, here's the thing about the end of wars. The moderate people, the ones with something to lose, they start thinking about survival. But the true believers, they double down. And the Waffen SS units in this region are very much true believers, the kind who'd rather burn everything down than admit defeat. Gangl's been getting reports all morning. SS execution squads are moving through the area, shooting defeatists and traitors, which basically means any German soldier who suggests that maybe, just maybe, continuing to fight when Hitler's already dead might not be the best plan. You can see the calculation in Gangl's face as he realizes he's got maybe hours before someone decides he's not sufficiently committed to the glorious last stand. Herr Major, one of his sergeants, enters, snapping to attention with somewhat less enthusiasm than would have been required even a month ago. The SS have set up another roadblock. They're checking papers and dealing with deserters. Gangl nods slowly, and you notice his hand unconsciously moving to his sidearm. Not to draw it, just to confirm it's there. It's the gesture of a man who knows he might need to make an impossible choice very soon. The funny thing is, and by funny, you mean cosmically absurd, just a few kilometers away, American tanks are rolling through the countryside, and for the first time in his military career, Gangl is thinking they might be the solution rather than the problem. The Major has been receiving other intelligence too, whispered reports from locals who've noticed his lack of enthusiasm for the fight to the last man orders coming from what's left of the German High Command. They tell him about Castle Itter, about the French prisoners there, about how the regular guards have fled and left only a skeleton crew. More importantly, they tell him the SS have plans for those prisoners, the kind of plans that involve mass graves and no witnesses. You're there when Gangl makes his decision, though he doesn't announce it dramatically. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, he simply starts issuing orders that would have gotten him shot for treason a week earlier. Pull our men back from the eastern checkpoints, he tells his officers, and send word to the resistance. Tell them I want to talk. The Austrian resistance. Now there's another piece of this puzzle that makes historians scratch their heads. These are locals who've been sabotaging German operations for months, maybe years. Some are communists, some are monarchists who want the Habsburg Empire back. Yes, really. And some just want the war to end so they can go back to farming and making schnapps. They've been Gangel's enemies, theoretically. But when you're watching your world collapse, theoretical enemies start looking like practical allies. Gangel meets with the resistance leaders in secret, or as secret as anything can be in a small alpine town where everyone knows everyone else's business. You can imagine the scene. Battle-hardened guerrilla fighters sitting across from a Wehrmacht major. Everyone's hands very carefully visible on the table. Nobody making sudden moves. The conversation is in German. But even if you don't speak the language, you can read the body language. Suspicion gradually giving way to surprise, then to something like hope. You want to do what? The resistance leader asks, echoing your earlier reaction to your sergeant. Save the French prisoners, Gangel repeats, before the SS kill them all. Here's where it gets interesting. Gangel could have just surrendered to the Americans. Plenty of Wehrmacht officers were doing exactly that. But something about those prisoners at the castle has gotten under his skin. Maybe it's the fact that they're not soldiers but politicians and thinkers. Maybe it's because he knows what the SS will do to them. Or maybe, and this is what some historians argue, he's trying to perform one decent act to balance against whatever he's done in the previous 6 years of war. You watch as Gangel starts organizing his own private rebellion. He identifies which of his men he can trust. Not many. It turns out, most Wehrmacht soldiers just want to go home. And the idea of fighting the SS doesn't appeal to anyone with a functioning survival instinct. But he finds 14 men willing to follow him, which speaks to either their loyalty or their own desire to end the war on the right side of history. The resistance provides Gangel with crucial intelligence. The Americans are close, specifically a unit from the 23rd Tank Battalion. If someone could reach them, explain the situation, maybe, just maybe, they'd be crazy enough to help. It's a long shot wrapped in an impossibility, tied with a bow of sheer desperation. But when you're a German major contemplating treason to save French prisoners from your own side's death squads, long shots start looking pretty good. You climb the winding road to Castle Itter, and with each step, the fortress looms larger against the alpine sky. This isn't some Hollywood set. This is 700 years of European history carved into stone, and for the last 2 years, it's been one of the most surreal prisons in the Nazi Empire. The castle started life in 1241, when some medieval lord decided this cliff was the perfect spot to show off his wealth and power. Little did he know that 7 centuries later, it would house the strangest collection of prisoners in World War II. As you approach the main gate, you can see why the Germans chose this place. The castle perches on a rocky outcrop like an eagle's nest, with only one road leading up. Any attacking force would be completely exposed, perfect for the defenders to pick off. The irony, of course, is that now the defenders might include the very prisoners it was meant to contain. You notice the modern additions: barbed wire strung between medieval battlements, machine gun positions built into 13th century tower windows. It's like someone took a fairy tale and weaponized it. Inside these walls, the French VIP prisoners have been living in a bizarre limbo. You've got 2 former prime ministers, Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, who actually hate each other with the passionate intensity only French politicians can muster. They haven't spoken directly in months, communicating through intermediaries like feuding celebrities. There's General Maurice Gamelin, who commanded all French forces in 1940 and still walks around in his uniform, maintaining military bearing despite being a prisoner. Marie-Agnès Caillaux is here too, Charles de Gaulle's older sister, captured because of her famous last name and her own resistance activities. The prisoners' quarters are nothing like what you'd find in a concentration camp. These rooms have actual furniture, books, even a radio, heavily monitored, naturally. The Germans have maintained this fiction that these are guests rather than prisoners, which leads to absurd situations. You hear stories of formal dinners where SS guards serve wine to French generals who are technically their captives. It's civilization maintained at gunpoint, polite conversation over the constant threat of execution. But the real star of this bizarre show is Jean Barotra, and you have to hear about this guy to believe him. He's a tennis legend, won Wimbledon twice in the 1920s, helped invent the modern game. The man is 47 years old and still walks around in his tennis whites like he's about to serve for match point. The guards think he's harmless, maybe a little touched in the head. They have no idea that Barotra has been secretly training, running laps around the castle courtyard, maintaining the fitness of a man half his age. Historians still debate whether he was planning an escape or just refusing to let captivity break his athletic discipline. The castle's commandant, until recently, was Sebastian Wimmer, an SS officer who managed to be both brutally efficient and weirdly respectful of his high-value prisoners. He's fled now, like most of the regular guards, leaving behind a skeleton crew who are mostly older Wehrmacht soldiers counting the hours until they can surrender. You can feel their nervousness as you explore the castle. They know the French prisoners could probably overpower them now, but everyone's waiting to see what happens next. Walking through the castle's medieval halls, you notice strange details. There's a chapel where some prisoners have been holding services, praying to the same God as their captors. The kitchen still functions, staffed by local Austrians who've been cooking French-style meals for 2 years because Reynaud complained about German food. There's even a small library where the prisoners have been writing memoirs, as if they're already preparing for the history books. The castle's architecture tells its own story. Original 13th century walls support 16th century additions, which connect to 19th century renovations, all topped with 20th century Nazi modifications. It's like a physical timeline of European conflict. You run your hand along stones that have witnessed 7 centuries of wars, and now they're about to see something unprecedented. Americans and Germans fighting together. From the highest tower, you can see for miles across the Tyrolean Alps. Snow still caps the highest peaks even in May, and the valleys below are impossibly green. It's beautiful enough to make you forget there's a war on, until you notice the smoke columns rising from various towns, signs of ongoing fighting or perhaps SS units destroying evidence. The tactical advantage of this position is obvious. Anyone approaching can be seen kilometers away, but that works both ways. If the SS come in force, the defenders will see them coming, but have nowhere to run. You discover that the prisoners have been preparing for something, though they're not sure what. Some have been stockpiling food and water. Others have identified defensive positions within the castle. Reynaud has been using his old military experience to organize things, while carefully not speaking directly to Daladier, who's doing the same thing in a different part of the castle. It's like watching divorced parents plan their kid's birthday party. Cooperation without communication. The remaining guards are a sorry lot. Most are older men, some wounded veterans no longer fit for frontline duty. They know the war is over. No, guarding French politicians is pointless, but they're more afraid of the SS than the Americans. You see it in their faces, that peculiar exhaustion that comes from being on the wrong side of history and knowing it. One of them, an Austrian conscript barely out of his teens, confides that he just wants to go home to his family's farm. He's been guarding former French Prime Minister Daladier, who's been teaching him French to pass the time. Only in a place like this could captors and prisoners develop something approaching friendship. You're about to meet Andreas Krobot, and if this whole insane story had a catalyst, it would be this Czech cook who decided to get on a bicycle and risk everything. Picture a middle-aged man who spent the war serving meals to French VIPs, listening to their conversations, watching the guards get more nervous each day. Krobot isn't a soldier, isn't a resistance fighter. He's just a guy who knows how to make a decent schnitzel and has developed something like affection for these French prisoners he's been feeding. On the morning of May the 4th, Krobot makes a decision that would terrify most people. The regular SS guards have fled. The skeleton crew is panicking. And everyone knows the Waffen-SS death squads are coming. The prisoners need help, and the only help available wears American uniforms. So Krobot does what any sensible person would do. He steals a bicycle and decides to pedal through active combat zones looking for at troops. No weapon, no military training, just a cook on a bike trying to save lives. You watch him wheel the bicycle out of the castle's storage shed. It's not even a good bike. The chain squeaks. One brake barely works, and the seat has seen better decades. But it's faster than walking, and speed matters when you're racing against SS execution squads. The remaining guards see him preparing to leave. Some look away, pretending not to notice. One actually wishes him luck, which tells you everything about how far discipline has collapsed. The road down from Castle Itter is treacherous even in peacetime. It switchbacks down the mountain like a snake with vertigo, and today it's complicated by abandoned vehicles, shell craters, and the occasional corpse. Krobot starts his descent, wobbling on the ancient bicycle, probably wondering what possessed him to volunteer for this madness. Every turn could reveal an SS checkpoint. Every straight stretch makes him a perfect target for snipers. About 3 kilometers down, he encounters his first obstacle, a Wehrmacht roadblock manned by soldiers who haven't gotten the memo that the war is essentially over. You can imagine the scene. A middle-aged cook on a bicycle trying to explain to armed soldiers that he needs to find Americans to save French prisoners in a castle. It sounds like the setup to a joke, except nobody's laughing. Miraculously, these soldiers belong to Major Gangel's unit. They've been told to expect unusual orders, and apparently, a cook on a suicide mission qualifies. They let him pass, even providing directions to where American forces were last spotted. Stay off the main roads, one soldier advises. The SS are shooting anyone they consider a deserter or traitor, and these days, that's pretty much everyone. Krobot nods, adjusts his grip on the handlebars, and pedals on. The bicycle chain protests with every rotation, but it holds together, unlike the German Reich crumbling around him. The countryside between Itter and Virgil is postcard perfect, if you ignore the war damage. Alpine meadows stretch between patches of forest, and normally these roads would carry farmers and tourists. Today they carry refugees, retreating soldiers, and one very determined cook. Krobot passes groups of Wehrmacht soldiers who've essentially given up, sitting by the roadside, weapons discarded, waiting for someone to officially surrender to. They watch him pedal past with expressions of bewilderment. Where could anyone possibly be going in such a hurry when the war is clearly lost? Near the village of Sol. Krobot faces his scariest moment yet. An SS patrol has set up an impromptu checkpoint, and they're checking everyone who passes. These aren't the demoralized Wehrmacht troops. These are true believers, the kind who'd rather see Germany burn than surrender. Crowbot can see them from a distance, black uniforms stark against the spring greenery. He makes a split-second decision and veers off the road into the forest. Now he's pushing the bicycle through undergrowth, branches catching at his clothes, the ancient bike frame groaning with abuse it was never designed for. You can hear SS voices from the road, maybe 50 meters away. They're interrogating someone, and from the sounds, it's not going well for whoever they've stopped. Crowbot freezes behind a large pine tree, hardly daring to breathe. A single snapped branch could give him away. Minutes pass like hours. Finally, the SS patrol moves on, and Crowbot emerges from the forest looking like he's been wrestling bears. His clothes are torn. The bicycle is covered in pine needles, but he's alive and still mobile. He rejoins the road, pedaling harder now, knowing that time is running out. The sun is getting lower, and everyone knows bad things happen after dark in a collapsing war zone. Historians still argue about exactly how far Crowbot cycled that day. Some say 8 kilometers. Others claim it was closer to 15. What matters is that he kept going through a landscape where anyone could shoot him for any reason or no reason at all. He passes burned-out vehicles, some still smouldering. He sees civilians looting abandoned German supply trucks. He even passes a group of Russian forced laborers who've armed themselves and are settling scores with local Nazi sympathizers. It's chaos compressed into a few square kilometers of alpine paradise. Then, finally, salvation appears in the form of olive-drab vehicles and soldiers who don't wear coal scuttle helmets. Crowbot has found the Americans, specifically a reconnaissance element of the 23rd Tank Battalion. He practically crashes the bicycle in his eagerness to reach them, stumbling over his limited English to explain the situation. French prisoners, castle, SS coming to kill them, need help immediately. The American soldiers, understandably, think he might be insane or maybe a very elaborate trap. You meet Captain John C. Jack Lee Jr. and immediately understand why he's the perfect officer for this insane mission. Lee commands a small force from Company B, 23rd Tank Battalion, and he's got the kind of reputation that makes other officers either admire him or shake their heads in disbelief. At 27, he's already a veteran of North Africa, Sicily, and the drive across France. More importantly, he's known for making decisions that conventional military wisdom would call inadvisable, but somehow work out. When Crowbot stumbles into the American position, still catching his breath from his death-defying bicycle ride, Lee is examining maps in his Sherman tank. You watch him listen to the cook's fractured English explanation, his expression shifting from skepticism to interest to something like amusement. "Let me get this straight," Lee says, lighting what must be his 20th cigarette of the day. There's a castle full of French VIPs, guarded by Germans who want to surrender, about to be attacked by other Germans who want to kill everyone. His crew sergeant, a pragmatist from Brooklyn, immediately points out all the reasons this is a terrible idea. They're low on ammunition. They have no idea how many SS troops they'd face. And oh yeah, they'd be trusting Wehrmacht soldiers not to shoot them in the back. It's the kind of mission that ends with either medals or coffins, rarely anything in between. But Lee has that look in his eyes, the same look he had before they charged across an open field in Normandy, the same look that's gotten them this far. "Mount up," Lee orders. "We're going to rescue some Frenchmen." You climb onto one of the tanks. There's Lee's Sherman, another Sherman commanded by Lieutenant Harry Bass, and a handful of other vehicles carrying about 15 American soldiers total. That's it. This tiny force is about to attempt something that military academies will later use as an example of either brilliant improvisation or complete recklessness, depending on the instructor's perspective. The convoy moves out, and you notice Lee has done something smart. He's brought along Crowbot as a guide. The cook sits on the back of Lee's Sherman, looking simultaneously terrified and relieved. He's accomplished his mission, but now realizes he's going back into danger, this time with a much bigger target painted on him. American tanks aren't exactly subtle, and the sound of their engines echoes off the alpine valleys like thunder. As you rumble toward Virgil, Lee radios back to battalion headquarters. The conversation is a masterpiece of understatement. Investigating reported American prisoners in Castle, he says, which is technically not a lie if you consider that freeing French prisoners from Germans counts as liberating potential American allies. His commander, used to Lee's creative interpretations of orders, sighs audibly over the radio, but doesn't explicitly forbid the mission. In the chaos of the war's end, nobody's quite sure what's authorized anymore. The first surprise comes when you reach Major Gangel's position in Virgil. Instead of an ambush, you find Wehrmacht soldiers standing in the open, weapons lowered, white flags improvised from bedsheets. It's surreal. Just days ago, these same men would have been trying to kill you. Now they're waving you forward like traffic cops. Lee halts the convoy, his hand never far from his .45, and dismounts to meet this German major who claims to want to fight alongside Americans. You watch this historic meeting. Captain Jack Lee, tanker from Norwich, New York, shaking hands with Major Joseph Gangel, career Wehrmacht officer. Neither speaks the other's language fluently, so they communicate through a mixture of broken English, sketchy German, and universal military gestures. Gangel has brought a small honor guard, his most trusted men, and they look as uncomfortable as you feel. Everyone's weapons are loaded, safety's off, fingers near triggers. One wrong move and this historic moment becomes a historic massacre. But Lee has always been a good judge of character, and something about Gangel convinces him. Maybe it's the desperation in the German major's eyes, or the fact that he's essentially signing his own death warrant by betraying the SS. Lee makes a decision that goes against every instinct trained into him. He agrees to accept Gangel and 14 Wehrmacht soldiers as temporary allies. Historians still debate whether this was brilliant leadership or dangerous naivety. Maybe it was both. Here's how this works, Lee tells everyone through an interpreter. My men stay in charge. You follow our orders. Anyone does anything suspicious, we shoot first and apologize to your families later. Clear? The Germans nod. What choice do they have? They've already crossed the Rubicon by approaching the Americans. There's no going back now. The combined force is pitifully small, maybe 30 men total, 2 tanks, and a handful of other vehicles. Against them could be anything from a company to a battalion of Waffen-SS, the most fanatical and well-trained German troops still fighting. Lee knows this, Gangel knows this, everyone knows this. But sometimes in war, you don't get to choose your battles with perfect intelligence and overwhelming force. Sometimes you just have to roll the dice and hope. As the strange convoy prepares to move toward Castle Itter, you notice small details that highlight the surreal nature of this alliance. An American GI shares a cigarette with a Wehrmacht soldier. Lee and Gangel spread a map on the Sherman's hull, planning approach routes like they've been allies for years. Someone makes a joke about how this will look in the history books, and nervous laughter ripples through both groups. Everyone's thinking the same thing, but nobody wants to say it. This is completely insane, and it just might get everyone killed. You watch American and German soldiers trying to work together, and it's like watching people attempt to dance when half of them hear waltz music and the other half hear heavy metal. The sun is setting as your mixed force prepares for what everyone knows is coming, an SS attack on Castle Itter. The awkwardness is palpable enough to cut with a bayonet, which several soldiers look tempted to do. An American private named Tommy from Ohio finds himself sharing a foxhole with a Wehrmacht corporal named Kurt. They're both checking their weapons, trying not to make eye contact. Finally, Tommy pulls out a pack of Lucky Strikes and offers one to Kurt, who accepts with a nod that manages to convey both gratitude and confusion. You realize this is probably the first time either of them has been this close to the enemy without trying to kill each other. The cigarette smoke mingles in the evening air, a small peace treaty written in tobacco. Captain Lee has set up a defensive perimeter around the castle, integrating German and American positions. It's a tactical nightmare. Different weapons, different ammunition, different everything. A German MG-42 machine gun team sets up next to an American .30 caliber position. The Germans have more ammunition for their weapons, so they share with Americans who can use it. You see a Wehrmacht sergeant showing a young GI how to properly load stripper clips for a captured Mauser rifle. Just 48 hours ago, this same instruction might have been preparation for killing Americans. Inside the castle, the French prisoners are experiencing their own version of culture shock. General Gamelin, ever the military professional, has offered to help plan the defense. He's drawing on his decades of experience, sketching defensive positions on a napkin, while Reynaud and Daladier temporarily suspend their feud to offer suggestions. It's like a very dangerous episode of The Odd Couple. Former enemies and current enemies, all trying to work together against future enemies. The Wehrmacht soldiers have brought what supplies they could, including several cases of German stick grenades, the famous potato mashers. An American sergeant examines them with professional interest. Always wondered how these worked, he mutters, as a German soldier demonstrates the pull cord mechanism. It's a bizarre training session where yesterday's enemies become today's instructors. Someone jokes that after the war, they should write a manual, how to fight together after trying to kill each other for years. You notice the small human moments that historians rarely capture. A German soldier shares photos of his family with an American who shows his own in return. Kids look pretty much the same whether they're in Milwaukee or Munich. Another pair discovers they're both bakers in civilian life and launch into an animated discussion about proper bread-making techniques, their weapons temporarily forgotten. These are the moments that make you realize how absurd war really is. These men have more in common than not, yet they've spent years trying to obliterate each other. Major Gangl assigns his men to mix positions with the Americans, partly for tactical reasons, but mostly to prevent any unfortunate accidents. Trust only goes so far when muscle memory has been trained for killing. You see him speaking quietly with his sergeant, making sure everyone understands. They fight with the Americans now, period. Any other action is treason. Of course, fighting against the SS is already treason, but that ship has sailed, hit an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of moral ambiguity. As night falls, Captain Lee calls a joint briefing. Americans and Germans crowd into the castle's great hall, a medieval chamber now hosting the most unlikely military meeting of the war. Lee speaks slowly, allowing time for translation. The SS could come from 3 directions. He points at a hand-drawn map. We hold the high ground, but we're outnumbered. Everyone fights. Everyone watches each other's backs. He pauses, looking at both groups. I don't care what uniform you're wearing, tonight, we're all on the same side. The ammunition situation is actually not terrible, thanks to German supplies. But there's a problem. American and German weapons use different calibers. A Wehrmacht soldier can't use American 30-06 rounds, and GIs can't fire German 7.92mm ammunition. So they devise a buddy system. Each mixed position has both American and German weapons, allowing them to share ammunition within each type. It's logical, practical, and completely insane that it's necessary. You help distribute the supplies, noticing how carefully everyone moves around each other. It's like a middle school dance where nobody wants to get too close to their partner. A German hands you ammunition boxes with exaggerated care, as if sudden movements might trigger some primal combat instinct. You respond with equal caution. Everyone's being so polite it's almost comical. After you. No, I insist. After you. While handling enough firepower to level a city block, John Barotra, the tennis champion, has volunteered to help with the defense. Still wearing his tennis whites, because of course he is, he's assigned to courier duty, running messages between positions. The sight of this aging athlete in sporting attire preparing for battle adds another layer of surrealism to an already surreal situation. Someone suggests he might confuse the SS, who'll think they're hallucinating when they see a tennis player in a medieval castle battle. Psychological warfare. Barotra agrees with a grin that suggests he's enjoying this far too much. As the last light fades, you take stock of your bizarre band of brothers. American tankers joke nervously with Wehrmacht infantry. French politicians argue about defensive positions with the passion they once reserved for parliamentary debates. A Czech cook who started all this with a bicycle ride checks on the food supplies. Because even in battle, people need to eat. It's a coalition held together by necessity, fear, and the strange hope that maybe, just maybe, enemies can choose to be allies when facing something worse. You feel it before you see it, that electric tension in the pre-dawn air that every soldier recognizes. It's 4 a.m. on May 5th, and the SS are coming. The first sign is the rumble of engines echoing through the alpine valleys, a mechanical thunder that makes your stomach clench. From your position on the castle walls, you can see headlights snaking up the mountain roads like a procession of angry fireflies. The Waffen-SS have arrived in force, and they're not here to negotiate. Captain Lee is already moving, his command presence filling the courtyard. Everybody to your positions. This is it. You don't need to understand English or German to know what that tone means. Americans and Wehrmacht soldiers scrambled to defensive positions they'd awkwardly established just hours before. The strange alliance is about to be tested by something more powerful than politics or nationality, the primal need to survive. Through your binoculars, you count at least 150 SS troops, maybe more. They're moving with the practiced efficiency of elite soldiers who've spent years perfecting the art of killing. These aren't demoralized regular troops or old men conscripted in the Reich's dying days. These are the Waffen-SS, true believers who'd rather die than see their twisted dream end. They've brought heavy weapons. You spot at least one anti-tank gun being positioned, plus multiple MG-42s. Your little mixed force of 30-odd defenders is outnumbered at least 5-1. Major Gangle joins Lee at the main gate, both officers assessing the situation with grim professionalism. Through an interpreter, they quickly coordinate. Gangle's men know the local terrain better, so they'll guide American positions. Lee's tanks will provide the heavy firepower, But they need to be careful. The Sherman's ammunition is limited, and that anti-tank gun could punch through their armor like tissue paper. It's a defensive puzzle with pieces that don't quite fit, held together by desperation and hope. The SS commander, you can tell by his peaked cap and arrogant stride, approaches under a white flag. This isn't surrender. It's one last chance for the defenders to abandon the race traitors in the castle. His voice carries across the morning air, sharp and contemptuous in German. Even without understanding the words, you get the message: surrender the prisoners, and maybe some of you live. Fight, and everyone dies. Gangle translates for Lee, his face darkening with each word. The SS officer is particularly venomous about the Wehrmacht traitors fighting alongside Americans. He promises special treatment for them, the kind that involves piano wire and meat hooks. Some of Gangle's men shift nervously. This is their last chance to switch sides, to claim they were coerced. You hold your breath, wondering if the fragile alliance will shatter before the first shot. But nobody moves. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's the knowledge that the SS don't really do mercy. Or maybe it's something more, a recognition that some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Lee steps forward, his voice carrying that special American confidence that sounds like bravado, but might just be genuine courage. Tell him, he says to the interpreter, that he can go to hell, and we'll send him there if he doesn't leave in 30 seconds. The SS officer's face contorts with rage. He spins on his heel and stalks back to his lines. You've got maybe 2 minutes before the shooting starts. Around you, men check weapons one last time, whisper prayers in multiple languages, touch lucky charms or photos of loved ones. A German soldier crosses himself. An American kid who can't be more than 19 throws up behind a wall, then wipes his mouth and takes his position with shaking hands. Fear is universal. Courage is choosing to stay anyway. The first shots come at 4:47 a.m. Historians know this because Reynaud, ever the politician, is taking notes for his memoirs even during the battle. An MG-42 opens up, its distinctive high-speed ripping sound echoing off the castle walls. You hear it called Hitler's buzzsaw, and now you understand why. The Allied soldiers have their own name for it. Jesus Christ, get down. Return fire erupts from the castle. American M1 Garands bark their 8-round clips. German Mausers crack with practiced precision. The medieval walls, built to withstand crossbow bolts, prove surprisingly effective against small arms fire. Stone chips fly as bullets impact, creating a dusty haze that mixes with gun smoke. The air fills with the snap of passing rounds, the whine of ricochets, and the universal cursing of soldiers in combat. Lee's Sherman tank, positioned to cover the main approach, opens up with its 75mm gun. The explosion is deafening in the enclosed courtyard, and the shell impacts among the SS positions with devastating effect. You see bodies thrown through the air, survivors scrambling for better cover, but the SS anti-tank gun is already swiveling toward the Sherman, its crew working with lethal efficiency. The battle has a strange rhythm, intense firefights followed by brief lulls as both sides reassess. During one pause, you see something that belongs in a movie, not real life. Borotra, the tennis champion, calmly walking across the courtyard carrying ammunition, still in his white sporting outfit. Bullets crack around him, but he doesn't run. He moves with the same measured pace he might use approaching the net at Wimbledon. Whether it's courage or insanity, you can't tell, but it has an effect on everyone who sees it. If a middle-aged tennis player can stroll through fire, What excuse does anyone else have for cowering? Inside the castle, the French prisoners aren't content to hide. Gamelin has organized them into a reserve force, armed with weapons taken from the fled guards. You've got former prime ministers loading rifles, generals directing fields of fire, and at least one resistance leader who seems entirely too comfortable with a submachine gun. It's democracy in action. If democracy involves shooting at fascists from medieval battlements, you're crouched behind ancient stonework, brass casings piling at your feet. When you witness the exact moment enemies become brothers, an SS squad has worked its way to the castle's east wall, too close for the tanks to engage. They're preparing to storm a section defended by 3 Americans and 2 of Gangel's Germans. You watch the Wehrmacht corporal, the same Kurt who shared cigarettes with Tommy from Ohio just hours ago, spot a potato masher grenade arcing toward the American position. Without hesitation, Kurt shoves Tommy aside and kicks the grenade back over the wall. The explosion showers them both with stone fragments, and for a second they just stare at each other, blood trickling from minor cuts, breathing hard. Then Tommy grins and slaps Kurt on the shoulder, and they're back to shooting. Except now they're moving as a team, covering each other's reloads, communicating in the universal language of combat veterans who know their business. This scene repeats across the castle's defenses. A German machine gunner runs out of ammunition just as an SS assault team rushes his position. An American bar gunner slides across rubble-strewn ground, tossing his last magazine to the German. The MG-42 roars back to life, cutting down the attack. The 2 gunners exchange a nod that says more than any translator could convey. They're not American and German anymore. They're just soldiers trying to keep each other alive. Captain Lee has positioned himself where leaders belong, at the point of maximum danger. His Sherman tank has become a bullet magnet, drawing fire from every SS weapon in range. The tank's armor rings like a bell under the impact of rifle and machine gun rounds. Then comes the distinctive crack of the anti-tank gun. The first shot goes wide, exploding against the castle wall in a shower of medieval masonry. Lee's gunner returns fire, but the SS crew is well dug in. Major Gangel coordinates the defense of the northern approach, where the heaviest SS pressure is building. You see him moving between positions, steady under fire, encouraging his men in German and broken English. An American sergeant watches him with growing respect. That Kraut officer knows his business. He admits to nobody in particular. It's high praise from a man who spent 3 years fighting Germans across Europe. The French prisoners have transformed from spectators to participants. Reynaud has organized an ammunition supply chain, using his political skills to coordinate former rivals into an efficient team. You, take these magazines to the South Tower. You, help me move these boxes. Nobody argues with the former Prime Minister of France, especially when he's holding a Schmeisser submachine gun with surprising competence. Then you witness Barotra's most insane moment yet. The SS have set up a machine gun position that's pouring devastating fire into the courtyard, pinning down several defensive positions. Someone needs to flank it. But the only route involves crossing 50 meters of open ground. Barotra volunteers with the casual air of someone offering to fetch coffee. Before anyone can stop him, he's sprinting across the courtyard in his tennis whites, moving with the trained agility of a world-class athlete. You watch in disbelief as the tennis champion zigzags through machine gun fire, bullets kicking up dust at his heels. He hurls grenades at the SS position with the same motion he might use for an overhead smash, then dives behind cover as the explosions silence the gun. The entire castle, American, German, and French, erupts in cheers. Even in the middle of a life or death battle, everyone appreciates witnessing something gloriously impossible. The SS bring up their anti-tank gun closer, determined to knock out Lee's Sherman. The gun crew works with admirable precision, given that they're under constant small arms fire. Their next shot doesn't miss. The armor-piercing round punches through the Sherman's frontal plate with a sound like the world's largest can opener. The tank lurches, smoke pouring from the hole. You hold your breath, waiting for the ammunition to cook off and turn the tank into a funeral pyre. But Lee and his crew are already bailing out, moving with the practiced speed of men who've done this before. They roll behind cover just as the Sherman's ammunition detonates, sending the turret spinning through the air like a giant's discus. The explosion rocks the entire courtyard, and for a moment, both sides stop shooting to witness the spectacular destruction. Then reality reasserts itself in the form of renewed SS attacks. Without the Sherman's firepower, the defense becomes desperate. You're down to counting individual rounds, rationing ammunition like misers hoarding gold. An American private admits he's down to his last clip. A German soldier wordlessly hands him a Mauser and a handful of stripper clips. "Is good rifle," he says in broken English. "Kill many Russians, now kill SS." It's a benediction and a curse wrapped in practical advice. The battle has developed its own brutal rhythm. Attack, repulse, brief respite to tend wounded and redistribute ammunition, then attack again. Bodies litter the approaches to the castle, mostly SS. But you've lost people too. An American medic works on a wounded German soldier while under fire. Because once you start saving lives, uniforms stop mattering. One of Gangel's men provides covering fire for the medic, screaming curses at the SS in German that probably question their ancestry back to the Neanderthals. You realize something profound has happened here. These aren't reluctant allies anymore. They're a unit. The shared experience of combat, the mutual dependence for survival, has created bonds that transcend nationality. When a German soldier falls, Americans drag him to safety. When an American position is overrun, Germans counterattack to restore it. It's not about politics or ideology anymore. It's about the man next to you, regardless of what uniform he wears. You can't believe what you're seeing. Jean Barotra, 47-year-old tennis legend, is stripping down to his white shorts and polo shirt like he's about to play a match at Roland Garros, instead of potentially die in an Austrian castle. The battle has been raging for hours. Ammunition is running dangerously low, and someone needs to break through enemy lines to find American reinforcements. Barotra volunteers with the casual confidence of a man asking to serve first. "You cannot be serious," Captain Lee says through an interpreter, unconsciously echoing what tennis officials probably told Barotra throughout his career. But the Frenchman is already stretching his legs, rolling his shoulders, preparing his body like an athlete before competition. He explains his logic with impeccable French rationality. He's the fastest runner here. He knows the local terrain from his daily exercises around the castle. And honestly, who's going to shoot an old man in tennis clothes? They'll think he's a hallucination. Major Gangel tries to talk him out of it, pointing out the obvious. The SS aren't known for their sense of humor or sporting spirit. But Barotra has that look athletes get when they've made up their minds. You've seen it in boxers before the final round, in runners before the gun. It's not fearlessness exactly, more like a complete focus that pushes fear into irrelevance. He's going to run through Nazi lines in tennis whites, and somehow this makes perfect sense to him. The plan, such as it is, involves Barotra sprinting down the castle road during the next lull in fighting. hoping to reach American lines before the SS can react. It's insane, suicidal, and probably their only chance. The radio is shot to pieces. The second Sherman tank, commanded by Lieutenant Bassett, is too far away to help, and without reinforcements, the castle will fall within hours. Everyone knows it, which is why nobody tries very hard to stop the tennis player from his mad dash. You help create a diversion, everyone opening fire at once to keep SS heads down. Borotra waits at the gate like a sprinter in the blocks. Weight forward, muscles coiled. Someone counts down in French, 3, 2, 1, and he's off. White clothes flashing in the morning sun as he pounds down the road with the form that won him Wimbledon twice. For a moment, the SS really don't shoot. Maybe they're too surprised. Maybe they think it's a surrender flag running away. Or maybe even hardened killers need a second to process the sight of a tennis player sprinting through their lines. Then reality catches up, and the machine guns open fire. You watch bullets stitch patterns in the dirt behind Borotra as he runs serpentine patterns that would make any football coach proud. He hurtles a stone wall like it's a tennis net, disappears into a drainage ditch, emerges 30 meters away still running. An SS soldier rises from cover to get a better shot, and 3 different defending positions fire simultaneously to drop him. Americans and Germans are working together to protect a Frenchman. If that's not European unity, what is? Borotra vanishes around a bend in the road, and you're left not knowing if he made it or if he's lying in a ditch somewhere, his white clothes stained red. The battle continues without him, growing more desperate by the minute. The SS have brought up more reinforcements, including what looks like a full mortar team. The first ranging shots impact in the courtyard, throwing up geysers of stone and earth. Without the Shermans suppressing fire, the defenders can't stop the mortars from registering on the castle. Inside, the situation is controlled chaos. The French politicians have abandoned all pretense of being non-combatants. Reynaud is directing fire from a tower window with a rifle, calling out targets with the same authority he once used to direct cabinet meetings. Daladier has organized the wounded into a reserve force, arming walking casualties with captured German weapons. Even their personal feud has been suspended in favor of not dying. Priorities have a way of clarifying under mortar fire. You notice Gangl taking more risks, exposing himself to rally defensive positions. Maybe he feels responsible for bringing this down on everyone. Or maybe he's just a good officer doing what good officers do, leading from the front. He coordinates with Lee through hand signals and shared understanding. 2 professionals who found common ground in keeping their men alive. When an SS assault threatens to overwhelm the Eastern Wall, Gangl personally leads the counterattack. Wehrmacht and U.S. Army soldiers following him without hesitation. The ammunition situation is beyond critical. You're watching soldiers count individual bullets, parceling them out like precious gems. An American private jokes that he's down to throwing rocks, then realizes that might actually become necessary. The medieval castle has arrow slits but no arrows, murder holes but no boiling oil. Someone suggests rolling stones down on the SS like the defenders of old. It's not entirely a joke. Then, just when things seem darkest, you hear it, the distant sound of engines, not the harsh rattle of German vehicles, but the deeper rumble of American armor. Borotra made it. That magnificent French tennis player in his ridiculous white outfit actually made it through SS lines and found help. The sound grows louder, and you can make out multiple vehicles, maybe a whole company. The cavalry is coming, and for once in this war, it's arriving in time. The SS hear it too. Their attacks become more frantic, desperate to overrun the castle before reinforcements arrive. It's a race now. Can they break through before American firepower tips the scales? You're firing your last magazines. German soldiers are throwing their stick grenades with both hands. And somewhere in the chaos, you realize you can't tell nationality by uniform anymore. Everyone's covered in the same dust, blood, and powder residue. You're all just defenders now, holding the line. You're inside what's left of Lee's Sherman tank when the real duel begins. The crew has abandoned it, but the tank's carcass provides decent cover, and you can see through the driver's periscope. What you witness next belongs in a manual on why tanks need infantry support, and why desperation makes soldiers do incredibly stupid things. Lieutenant Harry Bass's Sherman comes roaring up the castle road like cavalry in an old western. Except the horses have 75mm guns and the Indians are SS fanatics with anti-tank weapons. Bass has heard the gunfire, probably gotten Barotra's breathless message, and decided to charge straight into the fight. It's brave, it's needed, and it's about to get complicated because the SS have moved their anti-tank gun to cover exactly this approach. The German 75mm Pak-40 is a beautiful piece of engineering if you appreciate things designed to kill tanks. It sits low to the ground, hard to spot, with a muzzle velocity that can punch through a Sherman's armor at 1,000 meters. At the current range, maybe 300 meters, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. If the fish were 30-ton steel monsters racing toward you at full speed. Through the periscope, you watch Bass's gunner traverse his turret, searching for the anti-tank gun. It's a race between who shoots first and who shoots straight. The Sherman's advantage is mobility and a faster rate of fire. The Pak-40's advantage is a lower profile and a crew that's been killing tanks since Kursk. You hold your breath as both guns fire almost simultaneously. The German shell strikes the Sherman's frontal slope and ricochets skyward with a sound like God's own tuning fork. The American 75mm round impacts just short of the anti-tank gun, throwing up a curtain of dirt and stone. Both crews are good. Too good. They reload with practiced efficiency, while machine guns from both sides join the conversation, trying to suppress enemy crews. Inside the castle, the arrival of Bass's tank has given everyone a second wind. Defenders who were down to throwing helmets and harsh language suddenly find reserve ammunition they'd been hoarding. An American sergeant discovers that German stick grenades can be tied together for extra punch, a trick some of Gangel's men learned on the Eastern Front. Cultural exchange through explosives. It's not in any textbook, but it works. The tank duel continues with the methodical rhythm of a deadly dance. Bass's Sherman lurches forward, stops, fires, moves again. The German anti-tank crew adjusts aim, waits for the pause, sends another armor-piercing round screaming toward American steel. Both sides are landing hits now, but angles and luck determine whether shells penetrate or deflect. The Sherman's armor sparks like a grinding wheel as German rounds skip off its sloped surfaces. You notice something changing in the SS attacks. They're less coordinated now, more desperate. Some units are already pulling back, probably hearing the approaching American reinforcements. These aren't the disciplined assault teams from dawn. They're becoming a mob that smells defeat. But a desperate mob with automatic weapons is still deadly, and they're pouring everything they have into one last push. Then Bass's gunner finds his mark. The high-explosive round catches the Pak-40 dead center, and the anti-tank gun disintegrates in a flower of flame and twisted metal. The crew simply ceases to exist, transformed from living soldiers to physics lessons about explosive force. It's horrible and necessary, and you try not to think about families who'll get telegrams about their missing sons. With the anti-tank threat neutralized, Bass's Sherman becomes a mobile pillbox, its machine guns sweeping SS positions while the main gun picks off strong points. The psychological effect is immediate. Seeing a tank rolling through their positions breaks whatever cohesion the SS had left. Some units fight to the last man. Others fade into the woods. And a surprising number suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere. Major Gangel is everywhere during this phase, rallying the defense and preparing for counterattacks. You see him conferring with Captain Lee, both men grinning despite exhaustion and the intimate acquaintance with death they've shared. They're planning something, pointing at SS positions, and you realize they're not content to just defend anymore. They want to attack, to drive the enemy off completely. It's aggressive and risky and exactly what soldiers do when they smell victory. The counterattack, when it comes, is a thing of improvised beauty. Americans and Germans advance together, using tactics that shouldn't work, but do. Wehrmacht soldiers who know every rock and tree guide American firepower to hidden SS positions. U.S. Army aggression combines with German precision to create something neither could achieve alone. You watch Tommy from Ohio and Kurt the Wehrmacht corporal advance in perfect synchronization, one firing while the other moves, trained by different armies but speaking the same language of violence. Inside the castle, the French prisoners have become a third force in this unlikely alliance. Reynaud organizes covering fire from the towers, while Daladier leads a sortie to clear SS infiltrators from the lower courtyard. These are men in their 60s, politicians and thinkers, fighting like young soldiers because the alternative is death. Marie-Agnès Caillot, de Gaulle's sister, tends wounded with the calm efficiency of someone who's seen too much to be shocked by mere blood. The Sherman's main gun barks again, and another SS position disappears in smoke and flame. You can see individual enemy soldiers now, no longer the faceless mass from mourning, but young men dying for a cause already lost. Some fight with fanatic determination, others throw down weapons and raise hands. The smart ones are already gone, melting into the alpine wilderness to try their luck as fugitives rather than corpses. You check your ammunition and find 3 rounds. 3. After starting the morning with full pouches, you're down to counting individual bullets like a miser counting coins. Around you, the situation is the same. Americans passing their last clips to whoever has the best shot. Germans pooling their remaining grenades. Everyone running on fumes and adrenaline. The SS pressure is relentless, and despite Bass's tank support, you're being pushed back into the castle's inner defenses. That's when the betrayal comes, though historians still argue whether it was betrayal or just the chaos of battle. One of Gangel's men, a young corporal who'd been nervous all morning, suddenly breaks. Maybe it's fear. Maybe he's been an SS sympathizer all along. Or maybe his nerve just snaps. You see him turn his rifle on the American position next to him, and time slows to a crawl. Before he can fire, Major Gangel moves. The Wehrmacht officer throws himself between the corporal and the Americans, taking the bullets meant for his new allies. You watch Gangel fall, red spreading across his field grey uniform, his face showing more surprise than pain. The corporal stands frozen, perhaps realizing what he's done, before multiple rifles from both armies cut him down. Trust dies hard in battle, but betrayal dies harder. Captain Lee is beside Gangel in seconds, pressing field dressings to wounds that won't stop bleeding. The German major grips Lee's hand, says something in German that nobody needs to translate. It's an apology, a farewell, and a passing of responsibility, all in one. Gangl dies as he lived his last day, trying to bridge the gap between enemies. The remaining German soldiers look stricken, not just at losing their commander, but at how he died. Saving Americans, killed by one of his own. There's no time to mourn. The SS are probing the gates again, and you're defending with whatever comes to hand. A German sergeant takes command of Gangl's men with a simple declaration. The major's orders stand. We fight with the Americans. It's not eloquent, but it's enough. The mixed force continues to hold, united now by spilled blood and shared loss. The ammunition situation goes from critical to impossible. You watch soldiers fixing bayonets, preparing for the kind of fighting their grandfathers did in the previous war. An American private jokes grimly that at least bayonets don't run out of bullets. Kurt, the Wehrmacht corporal who's become Tommy's unlikely battle buddy, demonstrates the proper technique for using a rifle butt as a club. It's like chopping wood, he explains, but wood that shoots back. Inside the castle, the situation is equally desperate. The French prisoners have armed themselves with everything from antique swords pulled off the walls to chair legs broken off furniture. Reynaud has organized them into a last-ditch reserve, ready to defend the keep if the walls fall. You overhear him telling Daladier, "If we die here, at least we die as Frenchmen, not prisoners." Daladier actually smiles, their first friendly exchange in years, and it only took a castle siege to achieve it. The SS bring up what looks like their last reserves, including a flamethrower team that makes everyone's blood run cold. Fire is the castle defender's ancient enemy, and these medieval walls won't stop liquid flame. You can see the flamethrower operator checking his equipment, adjusting pressure valves with the calm professionalism of someone about to commit authorized atrocity. If they get close enough to use that thing, the castle becomes a crematorium. That's when you hear them. Engines, lots of them, and the distinctive sound of American voices shouting commands. The relief force has arrived in strength. Not just a few vehicles, but what looks like an entire company of the 142nd Infantry Regiment. They're deploying with practiced efficiency, establishing a base of fire, preparing to assault the SS positions. The cavalry has arrived, and this time they brought friends. But the SS aren't giving up. They make one last desperate push, throwing everything into a final assault. The flamethrower team rushes forward, protected by submachine gunners laying down suppressing fire. You're out of ammunition, reduced to throwing stones and harsh language. This is it. Either the relief force breaks through, or the castle falls in the next few minutes. Then Bass's Sherman speaks again, its high-explosive round catching the flamethrower team in the open. The operator's fuel tanks rupture, creating a fireball that consumes attacker and equipment alike. It's horrible, even by the standards of a day full of horrors, but it breaks the assault's momentum. SS soldiers caught between castle defenders and advancing American reinforcements face the soldiers' eternal choice: die fighting or live surrendering. Lee organizes the defense for what everyone hopes is the last phase. Americans and Germans still holding mixed positions, still watching each other's backs despite losing trust in dramatic fashion. The remaining Wehrmacht soldiers seem determined to prove their loyalty, fighting with the desperate courage of men who've already crossed their Rubicon and have nowhere else to go. You can see individual relief force soldiers now, fresh troops with full ammunition pouches advancing by squads. Their faces show the same expression you probably had this morning: confusion at seeing Americans and Germans fighting together. One lieutenant actually stops to confirm he's shooting at the right Germans, which would be funny if people weren't dying while he figures it out. The castle's wine cellar, forgotten in the morning's preparation, suddenly becomes relevant when a near-miss mortar round breaks open several casks. The smell of spilled wine mixes with cordite and blood, creating an aroma that survivors will describe as the smell of victory's price. Someone jokes about dying drunk as well as heroic, but nobody's laughing. You're too tired, too empty, too focused on simply surviving the next minute. You hear the roar of engines growing louder as the 152nd Infantry Regiment crashes into the SS positions like a tidal wave of olive, drab and firepower. The relief column has brought everything, half-tracks bristling with machine guns, more Sherman tanks, and what looks like an entire battalion of fresh infantry who haven't been fighting desperately since dawn. They hit the SS from behind while you and your mixed force press from the castle, creating a vice that crushes whatever remained of SS cohesion. The column is led by Major John Kramers, who takes approximately 30 seconds to assess the situation before ordering a general advance. You watch American soldiers dismount from half-tracks and advance in textbook formation, laying down base of fire while assault teams move forward. It's beautiful if you appreciate professional violence, and after hours of desperate improvisation, the sight of overwhelming force properly applied makes you want to weep with relief. The SS resistance crumbles like a dam breaking. Units that fought with fanatic determination suddenly discover urgent business elsewhere. You see squad-sized groups melting into the forest, individuals throwing away weapons and insignia, trying to transform from elite soldiers to harmless civilians in real time. Some still fight. The true believers always do, but they're islands of resistance in an ebbing tide. From your position on the castle walls, you watch Kramer's men systematically reduce SS strongpoints. They're using ammunition like they have infinite supplies, which compared to your 3 rounds might as well be true. A machine gun nest that had pinned you down for hours disappears under concentrated mortar fire. An SS platoon trying to retreat runs into a platoon of American infantry supported by a half-track. The resulting firefight is brief, one-sided, and final. Inside the castle, the French prisoners are experiencing their own form of shock. After months or years of captivity, freedom arrives not with fanfare but with confused American soldiers who aren't quite sure what to do with former French prime ministers. You watch a young lieutenant trying to figure out protocol for liberating political VIPs while bullets still crack overhead. Reynaud solves the problem by shaking the lieutenant's hand and declaring himself provisionally liberated, which apparently works in the absence of formal procedures. The remaining Wehrmacht soldiers under Gangel's dead command present a different problem. They fought as allies, but they're still technically enemy combatants, so Captain Lee solves this with battlefield pragmatism. They're designated as temporarily attached auxiliary forces, which is military speak for we'll figure out the paperwork later. The German soldiers seem relieved just to not be shot by either side, though you notice they're careful to stay close to Americans who can vouch for them. Kurt and Tommy from Ohio are sitting on rubble, sharing what might be the last cigarette in the castle. They can't speak each other's language beyond a few words learned under fire, but they've developed the wordless communication of men who've saved each other's lives. When Kramer's soldiers try to disarm Kurt, Tommy intervenes with a stream of profanity that would make a drill sergeant proud. "This man's with us," he declares, and somehow that's enough. The mop-up operation reveals the scale of the morning's fight. You count SS bodies scattered across the approaches to the castle, testimony to the devastating effectiveness of the mixed defense. American and German casualties are remarkably light, considering the odds, though Gangel's death hangs over everything like a shadow. His body is treated with respect by both sides, covered with an American flag because nobody can find a German one that isn't Nazi-fied. Borotra returns with the relief column, still in his tennis whites, though now they're more brown and red than white. He's grinning like he just won a championship match, which in a way he has. The sight of the tennis player causes another round of confusion among the reinforcements. Nobody briefed them about French athletes in sports attire being part of the defensive force. Someone suggests he should be awarded a medal for most unusual combat uniform, which gets the first genuine laughs of the day. The liberation of the French VIPs turns into an impromptu celebration. Wine from the broken casks is distributed, and you watch the surreal sight of American GIs toasting with former French prime ministers and Wehrmacht soldiers. Daladier and Reynaud, united by survival, actually shake hands. Marie-Agnès Caillot maintains dignified composure, while around her, men who've been trying to kill each other share wine like old friends. Lieutenant Basset, whose tank arguably saved the defense, is trying to write an after-action report that makes sense. You can see him struggling with phrases like Joint Wehrmacht US, Army Defensive Operation, and French political prisoners serving as irregular infantry. He finally gives up and writes, "Stuff happened. We won. Details to follow." Sometimes honesty is the best policy, especially when the truth sounds like fiction. The SS prisoners, those who surrendered rather than fled, are a sorry lot. These men who arrived as conquerors now sit with heads down, hands on their heads, trying to become invisible. The same American and German soldiers they tried to annihilate now guard them with professional detachment. You notice nobody's particularly gentle with them, but nobody's violating Geneva Conventions either. They're yesterday's enemy, today's problem, tomorrow's somebody else's paperwork. As the sun climbs toward noon, the immediate area is secured. Engineers check the castle for booby traps, while medics set up aid stations. The transition from battlefield to rear area happens with surprising speed once professionals take over. The castle that was a desperate battleground at dawn is becoming a processing center for liberated prisoners and POWs by lunch. War's ability to transform geography is something you never get used to. You watch the aftermath unfold with the awkwardness of a high school reunion, where half the attendees tried to kill the other half that morning. American soldiers eye Wehrmacht troops who are technically prisoners, but also just fought beside them. The Germans stand in an uncertain cluster, not quite under guard, but definitely not free to leave. Everyone's waiting for someone with sufficient rank to decide what happens next. Captain Lee, exhausted and still blood-stained from trying to save Gangel, takes charge with the weary authority of someone who's too tired for bureaucracy. "These men fought with us," he tells Major Kramers. "They lost their commanding officer defending American lives. That has to count for something." Kramers, a practical man, nods slowly. The Wehrmacht soldiers will be designated as prisoners of war, but with a notation about their service. It's not much. But in the chaos of May 1945, it might mean the difference between a POW camp and a firing squad. The French VIPs are experiencing their own adjustment. After months of captivity, freedom feels uncertain, fragile. Reynaud keeps checking doors, as if expecting them to be locked. Daladier paces the courtyard, unused to movement without boundaries. The psychological walls take longer to fall than the physical ones. An American officer offers to arrange immediate transportation to Paris, but several prisoners hesitate after so long. Even home feels foreign. You help with the grim task of collecting the dead. German and American bodies are separated at first. Then someone points out the absurdity. They died fighting together. Why segregate them now? Major Gangel is laid out with particular care. Lee ensures he's recorded as killed in action against the SS, not as an enemy combatant. It's a small distinction that might mean everything to a widow somewhere in Germany. The Wehrmacht soldiers are processed with surreal politeness. American MPs take their weapons and information, but allow them to keep personal effects. You see Kurt carefully folding a photo of his family before surrendering his Mauser. Tommy hovers nearby, clearly uncomfortable with his battle buddy becoming a prisoner. "This is wrong," he mutters. But nobody has a better solution. War has rules, even when those rules don't fit the situation. Some of the French prisoners are already thinking ahead to the politics of liberation. You overhear Reynaud discussing with an American intelligence officer which details should be emphasized in official reports. A castle siege makes better propaganda than admitting they spent most of the war in relative comfort. History, you realize, is already being edited while the gunsmoke still hangs in the air. The scene in the Great Hall resembles a bizarre diplomatic reception. American officers debrief French politicians while German soldiers sit quietly in a corner, unsure of their status. Someone has found intact wine bottles, and toasts are being made to victory, to survival, to the peculiar alliance that saved everyone. Borotra, still in his tennis outfit, is recounting his run through SS lines with theatrical flair. Each telling adds more drama, more narrow escapes. By evening, you suspect, he'll have fought off entire platoons with his tennis racket. Medical personnel work on wounded from both sides, following the strict neutrality of their profession. A German medic assists American doctors, his expertise welcomed despite his uniform. The wounded don't care about nationality. Pain is universal, and morphine doesn't check passports. You see an American private and a Wehrmacht soldier on adjacent stretchers, both laughing at something despite their wounds. Shared suffering creates its own brotherhood. The intelligence officers are having field day trying to make sense of the battle. The idea of American and German forces conducting a joint operation breaks so many assumptions that forms don't have appropriate checkboxes. One frustrated lieutenant is heard muttering, "How do I code Wehrmacht company friendly forces in the daily report?" His sergeant suggests creative writing might be a useful military skill after all. Outside, engineers are already repairing damage from the morning's fight. Shell holes are filled, rubble cleared, the castle beginning its transformation back to peacetime structure. The speed of change is disorienting. This morning, these walls were life and death. Now they're just old stones needing repair. War's intensity can't be sustained. Normal life seeps back in like water finding its level. The remaining SS prisoners are loaded onto trucks for transportation to formal POW camps. They look smaller now. These men who seemed like giants at dawn, without their weapons and fanaticism, they're just defeated soldiers heading for cages. Some glare defiantly, others stare at nothing, already beginning the long journey from warrior to prisoner to whatever comes after. You notice small human moments amid the official procedures. An American sergeant returns a cigarette case to a Wehrmacht soldier, polished silver engraved with initials. "Found this in the courtyard," he says gruffly. "Figured you'd want it back." The German nods, unable to speak past whatever emotion closes his throat. These gestures matter more than grand pronouncements about alliance and cooperation. The French prisoners prepare for departure with the energy of people remembering how to be free. Reynaud is already drafting statements for the press, while Daladier organizes the others with natural authority. They've survived something that will define the rest of their lives, though you wonder how much of this morning's desperation will make it into their memoirs. Politics prefers clean narratives to messy truth. As afternoon fades, the castle empties. Trucks carry away prisoners, liberators, and liberated alike. The Wehrmacht soldiers board their transport with dignity intact, if nothing else. You see Kurt and Tommy exchange a final nod, not quite a salute, not quite a wave, but something between brothers who can't be brothers. Tomorrow, they'll be enemy and victor again. But today, they were something else, something without easy labels. You discover why this incredible story stayed buried for decades when you watch the first reporters arrive at Castle Itter, the war correspondents, eager for heroes and villains in stark black and white, struggle with the grey complexity of what happened here. An American officer trying to explain the battle gives up after the third skeptical question. "You had to be there," he says finally, and maybe that's the only truth that matters. The official reports, when they're written, sanitize the messy reality into acceptable narrative. The Wehrmacht assistance becomes a footnote, their losses minimized, their heroism erased. It's easier to write American forces liberated French prisoners than explain how sworn enemies became temporary brothers. You understand why. The war isn't even over yet, and nobody wants to complicate the simple story of good versus evil that keeps armies moving and home front supportive. Major Gangel's death presents particular problems for both sides. The Germans can't celebrate a traitor who fought against the SS, while the Americans are uncomfortable honoring an enemy officer, regardless of his final actions. So Gangel disappears into bureaucratic limbo, his sacrifice acknowledged privately but publicly ignored. His men, processed as regular POWs, find their story dismissed or disbelieved. Who would credit Wehrmacht soldiers fighting alongside Americans? The French prisoners, now free to shape their narratives, mostly minimize the German contribution. It's understandable. They suffered under Nazi occupation, lost friends and family to German actions. Acknowledging that some Germans helped save them complicates their own stories of resistance and survival. Only Borotra speaks freely about the mixed defense, but tennis players are considered eccentric anyway, so his accounts are treated as colorful exaggeration. You learn that several American participants tried to ensure their German allies received recognition. Captain Lee writes report after report, emphasizing how Gangel's men were crucial to the defense. Lieutenant Basser confirms that without Wehrmacht knowledge of local terrain and their ammunition supplies, the castle would have fallen. But in May 1945, with concentration camps being liberated and the full scope of Nazi atrocities becoming clear, nobody wants to hear about good Germans. The Cold War adds another layer of burial. As tensions with the Soviet Union rise, the narrative of World War II simplifies further. Americans need clear-cut stories of democratic triumph over fascist evil, not complicated tales of temporary alliances that transcend ideology. The Battle of Castle Itter becomes an embarrassment, a footnote that doesn't fit the required mythology. Official histories mention it briefly, if at all, usually with details wrong or sanitized. Some participants try to maintain contact across the growing divide. You find letters in archives, carefully worded messages between former enemies trying to stay friends. Tommy writes to Kurt through Red Cross channels, simple notes about family and work, avoiding politics. But as Germany splits between East and West, even these tentative connections become difficult. By the 1950s, most correspondence stops, another casualty of new conflicts replacing old ones. The German participants face their own struggles with memory. In a nation grappling with collective guilt, stories of Wehrmacht soldiers as heroes, even complicated heroes, find no audience. Gangel's men learn to stay quiet about May 5th, 1945. When they gather at veterans' meetings, they share the story privately, like members of a secret society whose greatest moment must remain hidden. Some take the full truth to their graves rather than face disbelief or accusations of fabrication. American veterans of the battle face similar, if less severe, challenges. At VFW halls and reunion dinners, their story sounds like fantasy compared to straightforward combat narratives. Some stop telling it altogether, tired of skeptical looks and suggestions they're misremembering. The few who persist often embellish unconsciously, adding details that make the story more believable by making it more conventional. The complex truth gets harder to retrieve with each passing year. Historians who stumble across references to the battle often dismiss them initially. The idea of American Wehrmacht cooperation seems like propaganda or confusion. Primary sources are scarce. Many documents were lost or destroyed in war's aftermath. Survivors are reluctant to talk, either from habitual silence or fear of controversy. It takes determined researchers decades to piece together what really happened, cross-referencing scattered accounts to rebuild the truth. When the story finally emerges more fully in the 1990s and 2000s, it meets mixed reception. Some celebrate it as proof that human decency can transcend even war's divisions. Others criticize any positive portrayal of Wehrmacht soldiers, regardless of context. The battle becomes a Rorschach test for attitudes about guilt, redemption, and the possibility of enemies becoming allies. Each generation reinterprets it through their own lens of what war means and what lessons it should teach. You realize the survivors paid a price for their moment of unity, and they experienced something profound, the dissolution of hatred in favor of common cause, only to watch it buried under necessity and politics. The Wehrmacht soldiers lived, knowing they'd done something heroic that nobody wanted to acknowledge. The Americans carried memories of fighting alongside yesterday's enemies that seemed more dream than reality as years passed. In the end, the story's burial says as much about human nature as the battle itself. We prefer simple narratives to complex truths, clear divisions to messy cooperation. The Battle of Castle Itter challenges comfortable categories, suggesting that even in history's darkest chapters, surprising light can break through. But such light is often too bright for eyes adjusted to darkness. So we look away, filing the inconvenient truth under anomaly, rather than expanding our understanding of what's possible. You stand again at Castle Itter, but now it's years later, and tourists snap photos where machine guns once chattered. The bullet holes have been patched, the scorch marks painted over, the blood washed away by decades of rain. A small plaque mentions the battle, but you have to look for it, and most visitors pass by without noticing. The castle has returned to what it was before, a pretty fortress on an alpine hill, its stones keeping different secrets now. What does it mean? This strange battle where enemies became allies for a few desperate hours, You followed the story from Gangel's agonizing decision through the awkward alliance, from the desperate defense to the complicated aftermath. You've seen how quickly necessity can dissolve hatred, how shared danger can create brotherhood across the deepest divides. But you've also seen how quickly we bury such lessons when they don't fit our preferred narratives. The participants knew they'd touched something profound. In those hours between dawn and noon on May the 5th, 1945, the arbitrary lines that divide humans into categories of friend and enemy blurred into irrelevance. Americans and Germans didn't become friends. That's too simple. Instead, they became something rarer, humans recognizing other humans across the void of propaganda and trained hatred. They proved that even in war's machinery of dehumanization, individual choice remains possible. Think about Major Gangel, wrestling with conscience versus survival, choosing to act when inaction would have been safer. His death defending Americans remains one of history's poignant ironies. A Wehrmacht officer killed by his own side for protecting his recent enemies. He could have surrendered quietly, could have disappeared into post-war anonymity. Instead, he chose to make his last act meaningful, even knowing it might be forgotten or misunderstood. Consider Captain Lee, trained to kill Germans, suddenly asked to trust them with his life. Military training says enemies remain enemies until formally surrendered. But Lee recognized something more important than protocol, the possibility of shared purpose transcending uniform colors. His willingness to accept Gangel's offer created the space for impossibility to become reality. Without that leap of faith, the castle falls, the prisoners die, and history loses one of its most powerful examples of human flexibility. The French prisoners remind us that war touches more than soldiers. These politicians and thinkers, captured for who they were rather than what they'd done, found themselves thrust into combat at an age when most consider retirement. Their transformation from protected captives to active participants shows how extreme circumstances can reveal hidden strengths. Reynaud and Daladier, political enemies who spent years refusing to speak, united in common cause when survival demanded it. And Barotra, magnificent, absurd Barotra in his tennis whites, running through machine gun fire like he was chasing a drop shot. His athletic career was built on pushing limits, on believing impossible shots could be made. That same spirit carried him through SS lines when logic said he should have died. Sometimes survival requires not just courage, but a kind of creative insanity, a refusal to accept that the probable outcome is the only outcome. The ordinary soldiers matter most, though Tommy and Kurt, who moved from trying to kill each other to saving each other's lives in the span of hours. They had no grand ideological reasons, no complex political calculations. They simply recognized another human in danger and acted accordingly. Their bond, formed in extremity and severed by circumstances, represents millions of similar connections that war's end destroyed. How many friendships died stillborn because the world wasn't ready for enemies to be friends? Historians still argue about the battle's significance. Some call it a meaningless footnote, a quirk of war's chaos that teaches nothing applicable to normal life. Others see it as proof that human nature contains more possibility than our political systems acknowledge. The truth, like most truth, probably lies in the messy middle. The battle happened because of specific, unrepeatable circumstances. But within those circumstances, people made choices that revealed something fundamental about human capacity for change. What lessons can we take from Castle Itter? Perhaps that our categories of friend and enemy are more fluid than we pretend. Perhaps that shared danger can create bonds stronger than shared background. Perhaps simply that even in history's darkest moments, small lights of decency can shine. The battle doesn't prove that all enemies can become allies, or that all conflicts can be resolved through recognition of common humanity. But it does prove that sometimes, in some places, with some people, the impossible becomes possible. The survivors are mostly gone now, taking their memories of that strange morning into whatever comes after. But their story remains, a stubborn fact that resists easy categorization. In a world that often seems trapped in endless cycles of division and conflict, Castle Itter whispers that other outcomes are possible, not inevitable, not easy, but possible. Sometimes enemies can choose to be allies. Sometimes hatred can yield to necessity and even respect. Sometimes humans can surprise themselves with their capacity to transcend training and tradition. As tourist voices fade, an alpine silence returns. You might imagine you can still hear echoes, American English mixing with German, French accents adding color, the universal sounds of soldiers doing impossible things together. The castle keeps its secrets well, but if you listen carefully, you might hear what those stones witnessed, the sound of humanity choosing cooperation over conflict, even if just for one desperate morning in May. The battle for Castle Itter ended with victory, but perhaps the real victory was smaller and larger than military success. For a few hours, sworn enemies proved that enmity need not be permanent, that humans can choose differently when circumstances demand it. That's not much against history's weight of hatred and division, but it's not nothing either. Sometimes, not nothing is enough to matter. Sometimes, the impossible happens, and we glimpse what we might be capable of, if we're brave enough to try. The sun sets behind the Austrian Alps, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that make even ancient stones look soft. You've traveled far through this story, from the first impossible handshake between enemies to the last fading echo of what could have been. Now it's time to let the tale settle into your mind like sediment in still water, becoming part of your own understanding of what humans can do when the usual rules fall away. As your breathing slows and your muscles relax, imagine those men, American, German, French, not as soldiers or enemies, but simply as people who found themselves in an extraordinary moment and rose to meet it. They were afraid, certainly, exhausted, definitely, but they chose to see past uniforms to the humans wearing them. In your own life, you carry the same capacity for surprising yourself, for choosing connection over division when the moment demands it. Let the images fade now, the castle walls softening into shadow, the sound of gunfire becoming distant thunder, then wind, then silence. You're safe in your own bed, in your own time, but you carry with you the knowledge that even sworn enemies can become allies when something greater calls them. History is full of darkness, but also these unexpected stars of human decency that shine all the brighter for their rarity. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Tomorrow you'll wake to your own challenges, your own choices about who to trust and how to act. But tonight, you rest knowing that somewhere in the past, ordinary people did extraordinary things, proving that the lines we draw between us are never as permanent as they seem. In the space between sleeping and waking, between memory and dream, let their courage become part of your own story. Peace comes not from the absence of conflict, but from knowing that even conflict can transform into cooperation. Given the right moment and the right choices, sleep now. carrying with you the tale of when enemies fought as one, and won more than just a battle.